Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The rain had been relentless for 3 days, turning London's streets into glistening mirrors that reflected the city lights in fractured, watery patterns. For Ilara Whitestone, 27, the weather matched her mood perfectly, a seemingly endless downpour with no relief in sight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged the last of the leather-bound classics in the small, cramped bookshop where she worked 5 evenings a week after her day job at the cafe. "You should head home soon, dear," Mrs. Haverford, 72, the elderly shop owner, called from behind the counter. "That storm's only getting worse." Ilara glanced at the antique clock on the wall, 8:42 p.m. 18 minutes until closing. 18 minutes until she could rush to the hospital to check on Grandma Beatrice. 80 before visiting hours ended at 10:00. "I'll just finish this section," she replied, her melodic voice carrying a hint of the exhaustion she fought daily. The bell above the door jingled, and both women turned, surprised that anyone would venture out in such weather. A tall figure stood in the doorway, water streaming from an expensive wool coat that did little to hide the elegant suit beneath. The man shook his head slightly, droplets of water flying from his dark auburn hair. Mrs. Haverford straightened immediately, sensing wealth and importance. "Good evening, sir. Dreadful night to be out. How may we help you?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he took 2 unsteady steps forward, one hand rising to loosen his tie as if it was suddenly strangling him. Something in his movement caught Ilara's attention, a lurching quality that seemed wrong. "Sir," she called, taking a step toward him. His eyes met hers across the room, startlingly green against his flushed face, and in that moment, Ilara saw raw panic in them. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a harsh, wheezing gasp escaped. Then, as if his strings had been cut, he collapsed to the floor. "Oh my God, Miss S." Haverford cried, frozen behind the counter. Ilara dropped the book she was holding and rushed to the man's side. His face was turning an alarming shade of red, blotchy hives appearing at his jawline. His breathing came in desperate, strained wheezes. "Call an ambulance," Ilara shouted to Mrs. Haverford, who fumbled for the phone. Kneeling beside him, Ilara loosened his tie completely and unbuttoned his shirt collar. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you allergic to anything?" The man's eyes locked onto hers again, wide with fear. He managed a single word: shellfish. Ilara's mind raced back to her 6 months volunteering at Royal London Hospital. "Anaphylaxis," she muttered. "Do you have an EpiPen?" He shook his head weakly, his lips taking on a bluish tinge. "Mrs. Haverford, how far out is the ambulance?" Ilara called, her hands moving to check his pulse, rapid and weakening. "At least 15 minutes with the flooding on Oxford Street. 15 minutes. Too long." Ilara made a split-second decision. "I need your help. We have to elevate his legs." Together, they managed to prop his long legs up on a stack of books. Ilara positioned his head to maintain his airway, her hand gentle but firm beneath his neck. His skin burned with fever against her palm. "Stay with me," she urged, leaning close enough that she could feel his labored breath against her cheek. "Help is coming, but you need to fight." The man's eyes never left her face, as if she were an anchor in a storm. Something about that desperate gaze stirred something in Ilara, a connection that seemed to transcend their circumstances. "My name is Ilara," she said softly, instinctively knowing that keeping him conscious was crucial. "Can you tell me yours?" His lips moved, but the sound was barely audible. She leaned closer, her ear nearly touching his mouth. "Julian," he whispered, the effort clearly costing him. "Julian," she repeated, the name feeling strangely right on her lips. "You're going to be all right, Julian. I promise." His hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength given his condition. For a moment, despite the dire situation, a current seemed to pass between them, something electric and undeniable. Ilara told herself it was merely the heightened emotion of the moment, yet she couldn't tear her gaze from his. The next minutes passed in a blur of tension. Ilara kept talking to him, her voice low and soothing, telling him about the book she'd been shelving, about the coming spring, about anything that might keep him tethered to consciousness. All the while, her fingers remained entwined with his, her other hand monitoring the pulse at his neck. When his breathing seemed to worsen, she shifted to support him in a semi-upright position, cradling his upper body against her chest. His head rested against her shoulder, his hair damp from the rain, carrying the scent of expensive cologne. Despite his condition, Ilara couldn't help noticing his striking features, the strong jawline now marred by angry hives, the elegant nose, the well-formed lips struggling for air. "The ambulance should be here any minute," she murmured, feeling his body tremble against hers. "Just hold on a little longer." His eyes fluttered, beginning to close. No, stay with me, Julian," she urged more forcefully, squeezing his hand. "Look at me." With visible effort, he forced his eyes open again, focusing on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. In that moment of connection, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that seemed impossible between strangers. The wail of sirens finally broke the tension. Miss S. Haverford rushed to open the door as paramedics burst in with equipment and a stretcher. They moved efficiently, taking over from Ilara, asking rapid questions about what had happened. "Suspected shellfish anaphylaxis," she reported, reluctantly releasing Julian's hand as they transferred him to the stretcher. "Onset approximately 12 minutes ago. No EpiPen available." One of the paramedics gave her an approving glance. "You've done well keeping his airway open. Are you a medical professional?" "Just a former hospital volunteer," she replied, watching as they administered epinephrine and attached an oxygen mask. As they prepared to wheel him out, Julian's eyes sought hers one final time. Through the oxygen mask, his lips moved, forming what looked like, "Thank you." Ilara managed a reassuring smile, though her heart was racing with an emotion she couldn't name. The bell jingled again as the door closed behind them, leaving the bookshop in sudden, heavy silence. "Well," Miss S. Haverford exclaimed, visibly shaken, "I believe you've just saved that gentleman's life, Ilara." Ilara stared at her hands, still feeling the ghost of his touch. "I just hope he'll be all right." "I'm sure he will, thanks to you." The older woman patted her shoulder. "You should go home now, dear. It's been quite an evening." Ilara nodded absently, gathering her things in a daze. As she pulled on her worn coat, her thoughts remained with the mysterious Julian. Something about those intense green eyes, the connection she'd felt while holding him, had stirred her in a way she couldn't explain. "Don't be ridiculous," she chided herself. "He was a man in distress, and you helped him. That's all." Yet, as she stepped out into the rain, umbrella raised against the downpour, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, that her life had somehow shifted on its axis during those few charged minutes. At the end of the street, an ambulance pulled away, lights flashing against the rain-slicked pavement. Ilara watched until it disappeared around a corner, carrying with it a stranger who, against all reason, no longer felt like a stranger at all. Turning toward the underground station, she hurried her steps. Grandma Beatrice would be waiting for her visit, and Ilara was already late. She pushed thoughts of Julian from her mind, telling herself she would likely never see him again. How wrong she was. Chapter 2. Fated Hearts. Julian Ashbourne, 35, stood at the window of his Belgravia penthouse, watching raindrops race down the glass. 3 weeks had passed since his near-fatal allergic reaction, yet he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved his life. Ilara. Even her name felt like poetry on his tongue. "You're obsessing," his friend and physician, Dr. Felix Harrow, 38, remarked from behind him. The hospital staff checked. "She didn't leave any contact information. She was real, wasn't she?" Julian asked, not turning around. "Sometimes I wonder if I hallucinated her because of the anaphylaxis." Felix sighed. "She was real. The paramedics confirmed a bookshop employee provided initial treatment. But London has millions of people. Julian, finding one woman with only a first name, I'd know her anywhere." Julian interrupted, finally turning to face his friend. Dark circles beneath his eyes revealed nights of restless sleep. Her voice, her eyes. "There was something about her, Felix. Something I can't explain. You were oxygen deprived and in shock," Felix said gently. "It's not uncommon to form intense attachments to caregivers in life, threatening situations." Julian shook his head. "This is different. When she held my hand." He trailed off, unable to articulate the connection he'd felt, a recognition that defied logic. Felix studied his friend carefully. In 15 years of friendship, he'd never seen Julian so affected by anyone. Since his illness and the subsequent abandonment by his fiancée, Cassandra, Julian had maintained careful emotional distance from everyone. "Very well," Felix conceded. "Where was this bookshop?" "Near Bloomsbury, Miss S. Haverford's Literary Treasures." Then start there, Felix suggested. But Julian, manage your expectations. Even if you find her. I know, Julian cut him off. I just need to thank her properly. They both knew it was more than gratitude driving him. Saturday morning found Alara in St. James's Park, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Despite the light drizzle, she'd escaped to her favorite bench, desperate for a few hours of solitude and creative expression. Her grandmother was having a good day, watched over by Mrs. Langley, 70, their elderly neighbor, giving Alara a rare moment of freedom. Her charcoal pencil moved across the paper, capturing the misty outline of the palace in the distance. Art had always been her refuge, her dream. Until life had demanded, she set it aside for more practical pursuits. These stolen moments were all she had left of that dream. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the approaching figure until a shadow fell across her sketch. Looking up, she froze, her pencil suspended mid-stroke. Julian Ashbourne stood before her, tall and imposing in a charcoal wool coat, holding an umbrella that he immediately positioned to shield her from the increasing rainfall. "It is you," he said, his voice deep and cultured, a hint of wonder in his tone. Alara stared, unable to process his sudden appearance. He looked remarkably different from the dying man she'd cradled in the bookshop. Strong, vital, aristocratic in his bearing. Only his eyes remained the same, that intense green that had haunted her dreams for weeks. "How did you find me?" she finally managed, closing her sketchbook protectively. "I've been looking everywhere," he admitted. "Mrs. Haverford told me you sometimes sketch here on weekends." Alara felt a flutter of unease mixed with something else, something warmer and more dangerous. "You've gone to considerable trouble for a simple thank you." His lips curved slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" The rain intensified, droplets drumming against his umbrella. Without asking permission, Julian settled beside her on the bench, careful to keep the umbrella positioned over them both. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Alara was acutely aware of his proximity. "You saved my life," he continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "I wanted to express my gratitude, but—" he paused. "I also wanted to see if what I felt was real, or merely a product of my condition." Alara's heart quickened. "And what did you feel, Mr. Ashbourne?" "Julian," he corrected. "I felt as though I'd known you before, as if in that moment, holding your hand was the most natural thing in the world." The directness of his statement should have made her retreat. Instead, Alara found herself drawn to his honesty. "That's quite a dramatic interpretation," she said, trying to sound practical despite the traitorous racing of her pulse. "I'm not typically given to dramatics," he responded with a slight smile. "May I see your sketches?" The request was unexpected. Alara hesitated, then slowly opened her sketchbook. Julian studied her work with genuine interest, his expression revealing appreciation rather than polite curiosity. "These are extraordinary," he said finally. "You've captured something beyond the physical landscape. There's emotion in these lines." His observation, so perceptive, caught her off guard. "I studied art briefly at university before I had to withdraw." "Why did you withdraw?" he asked. The question touched on wounds still raw. "Life intervened," she answered simply. "My grandmother needed care after her first stroke, and there were financial considerations." Julian nodded, not pressing for details she clearly didn't wish to share. "Do you know Tennyson?" he asked instead, changing the subject. "In Memoriam was my father's favorite," she replied, surprised by the shift. Julian looked pleased. "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," he quoted. "Though I've always preferred Ulysses myself. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." "A fitting personal motto for a man who appears to get what he wants," Alara observed, a touch of defiance in her tone. His eyes darkened slightly. "Not always," he said softly. The rain increased to a downpour, water falling in sheets around their small sanctuary beneath the umbrella. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "We should find better shelter," Julian suggested, offering his hand to help her up. Alara hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The contact sent the same inexplicable current through her that she'd felt in the bookshop. From Julian's slight intake of breath, she knew he felt it too. They hurried through the park, Julian matching his stride to hers, the umbrella held carefully to protect her sketchbook. As the storm intensified, they made a mutual, wordless decision to seek refuge in Westminster Abbey, its ancient stones offering sanctuary as they had for centuries. Inside, the cathedral was dimly lit and nearly empty, most tourists having fled the inclement weather. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floor as Julian guided her toward a quiet corner near a stained glass window depicting the sacrifice of Christ. "Better?" he asked, shaking droplets from the umbrella. Ilara nodded, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the vastness of the cathedral. She moved toward the window, ostensibly to admire the craftsmanship, but also to put some distance between them. Julian followed, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and bergamot. "Why did you really look for me?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the colored glass. "Because I haven't slept properly since that night," he answered, his honesty disarming. "Because when I close my eyes, I see your face. Because something happened between us, Ilara, and I needed to know if it was real." She turned to face him then, her heart pounding. "And is it real?" Julian stepped closer, closing the space between them. "You feel it too," he said, not a question but a statement. Before Ilara could respond, his hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle but sure. Time seemed to suspend as he leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Ilara remained motionless, drawn by a force she couldn't name. His lips met hers with unexpected tenderness, a kiss that began as a whisper but quickly deepened as Ilara responded. Her sketchbook fell forgotten to the floor as her hands found his shoulders, steadying herself against the rush of sensation. Julian's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer until she was pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. The kiss transformed, passion replacing gentleness, as years of loneliness and restraint gave way to raw need. Ilara's back met the cool stone column beside the window, Julian's body shielding her from view as his hands tangled in her hair. Lightning flashed through the stained glass, casting prismatic colors across their entwined figures. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Julian rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "Tell me you felt nothing," he whispered, "and I'll walk away." Before Ilara could answer, her phone rang shrilly in her pocket. Reluctantly pulling away, she answered to hear Mrs. Langley's panicked voice. "It's your grandmother," the elderly woman said. "She's taken a turn. The ambulance is already here." Ilara's world tilted. "I'm coming now," she said, ending the call with shaking fingers. "What is it?" Julian asked, concern replacing desire in his eyes. "My grandmother," Ilara explained, already gathering her fallen sketchbook. "I have to go." Julian nodded immediately. "My car is nearby. Let me take you." She started to refuse, but practicality won out. "Thank you." Outside, the rain continued unabated. Julian guided her to a sleek black Bentley parked nearby, opening the door for her before sliding in beside her. As he gave the driver instructions, his hand found hers, offering silent support. In the intimacy of the back seat, surrounded by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windows, Ilara found herself drawing strength from his presence. Whatever had begun between them impossible, impractical, inexplicable as it was, she could no longer deny its reality. Whether blessing or curse remained to be seen. Chapter 3. Dark Revelations. The fluorescent lights of London Royal Hospital cast harsh shadows across Ilara's face as she sat beside her grandmother's bed, counting the steady beeps of the heart monitor. 3 days had passed since Beatrice's collapse, 3 days of tests and worried consultations with doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones. Ilara's hand rested gently on her grandmother's frail one, mindful of the fourth line. Beatrice Whitestone had always been a force of nature, the woman who had raised Ilara after her parents' fatal car accident, who had worked 2 jobs to keep their small home, who had encouraged Ilara's artistic talents even when practicality suggested otherwise. Seeing her reduced to this fragile figure in the hospital bed was almost unbearable. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she was surprised to see Julian standing in the doorway, a modest bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. In the 72 hours since he had rushed her to the hospital, he had been an unexpected constant, arranging for specialists to consult on Beatrice's case, ensuring Ilara ate something between vigils, quietly handling details she was too exhausted to consider. "How is she today?" he asked, his voice low as he placed the flowers on the windowsill. "Stable," Ilara answered, the word holding both relief and uncertainty. "They're saying the medication is helping, but it's too soon to know if there's been permanent damage from the stroke." Julian nodded, pulling a chair beside hers. Dr. Harrow reviewed her latest scans. "He's cautiously optimistic." Ilara glanced at him, a question in her eyes. Felix, Dr. Harrow, is a friend, Julian explained. One of the few people I trust implicitly. His hand found hers, enclosing it in gentle warmth. The intimate gesture felt both new and familiar, as if their hands had always been meant to find each other. In the quiet of the hospital room, with the rhythmic beeping of monitors as background, Ilara allowed herself to draw strength from his touch. "You don't have to keep coming," she said softly, though her fingers tightened around his. "You've done more than enough already. Do you want me to leave?" he asked directly. Ilara hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she admitted, "but I don't understand why you're here. You barely know us." Julian's gaze settled on their joined hands. "I know enough," he said simply. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Beatrice's steady breathing and the clinical sounds of the hospital. Eventually, a nurse entered to check vitals, informing Ilara that her grandmother would likely sleep through the night. "You should rest," Julian suggested gently. "You've barely left this room for 3 days." Ilara knew he was right. Exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight, making her thoughts sluggish and her body ache. Still, she hesitated. "I can have someone call you immediately if there's any change," the nurse assured her. Finally nodding, Ilara leaned over to kiss her grandmother's forehead. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow," she promised. Outside, the hospital corridors were quiet, the late hour having diminished the usual bustle. Julian guided her with a light hand at her back, his presence somehow making the sterile hallways less intimidating. "My driver can take you home," he offered. As they approached the exit, Ilara stopped, suddenly realizing she hadn't been home in days. The thought of returning to her empty flat, with its reminders of Beatrice's absence, filled her with unexpected dread. Julian seemed to read her hesitation. "Or you could come to my place," he suggested carefully. "I have plenty of guest rooms. You could shower, have a proper meal, sleep in a real bed instead of that hospital chair." She should refuse. Every instinct for self-preservation urged caution. Yet the thought of facing the empty flat, of being alone with her fears for Beatrice, was more daunting than accepting his offer. "All right," she agreed, surprising them both. "Thank you." The drive to Julian's Belgravia townhouse passed in silence, Ilara too exhausted to maintain conversation. When they arrived, the grandeur of the building, with its white facade and elegant columns, barely registered through her fatigue. Inside, however, the warm lighting and understated luxury of his home penetrated her exhaustion. Original artwork graced the walls, and comfortable furniture invited relaxation rather than formal admiration. It was the home of someone with not just wealth but taste and confidence. "Let me show you to a guest room," Julian offered, leading her up a curved staircase. The room he provided was elegant yet inviting, decorated in soothing blues and creams. An adjoining bathroom featured a massive soaking tub that made Ilara's aching muscles yearn for immersion. "There are fresh towels in the bathroom," Julian told her. "I'll have Anna, my housekeeper, leave some clean clothes outside your door. They'll be a bit large, but more comfortable than sleeping in what you've been wearing for days." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Ilara deeply. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Julian hesitated at the door. "Try to rest. We can talk in the morning." After he left, Ilara filled the luxurious tub with steaming water and lowered herself into it with a sigh that was almost a sob. The events of the past days meeting Julian, Beatrice's stroke, the upheaval of emotions seemed to dissolve in the warm water, along with the hospital's antiseptic smell. By the time she emerged, wrapped in a plush towel, she found clean silk pajamas outside the door as promised. Exhaustion claimed her almost the moment her head touched the pillow, pulling her into deep, dreamless sleep. Hours later, she woke disoriented, screaming her grandmother's name into the darkness. Within moments, the door opened, and Julian appeared, wearing only pajama bottoms, his bare chest pale in the dim light. Without hesitation, he crossed to the bed and sat beside her, gathering her trembling form against his chest. "It was just a dream," he murmured into her hair. "Beatrice is stable. You'd have been called if anything changed." Ilara clung to him, reality slowly reasserting itself. "I dreamed she was gone, that I was completely alone," she whispered against his skin. "You're not alone," Julian assured her, his voice a rumble she could feel through his chest. Later, she would blame exhaustion and emotional vulnerability for what happened next. Looking up at him, her face still damp with tears, something shifted between them, comfort transforming into awareness, solace into desire. Julian must have felt it too, for his breathing changed, becoming more measured. His hand, which had been stroking her hair soothingly, stilled. "Ilara?" he whispered, her name a question and a warning. She answered by rising up to press her lips to his, a kiss born of need and gratitude that quickly became something else entirely. Julian responded with restrained passion, allowing her to set the pace, his hands gentle but insistent as they cradled her face. When she pulled him down beside her on the bed, he went willingly, his body a welcome weight and warmth above her. Their kisses deepened, grew hungrier, as hands explored with increasing urgency. The silk of her borrowed pajamas whispered between them, a barrier too easily removed. In the silvery darkness, they discovered each other slowly at first, then with mounting passion. Julian's lips traced a path along her throat, her collarbone, lower still, drawing soft gasps from Ilara that turned to moans as he discovered particularly sensitive places. Her hands learned the contours of his body, the broad shoulders, the surprisingly defined muscles beneath smooth skin, the raised scar along his lower abdomen that made her wonder but not ask. When they finally joined, the connection was more than physical, a recognition, a homecoming neither had expected to find. They moved together with increasing urgency, whispered words giving way to breathless cries as pleasure built and crested between them. Afterward, lying in the tangled sheets with Ilara's head pillowed on his chest, Julian broke the comfortable silence. "I barely know you," he said, echoing her earlier words. "Yet I feel I've waited for you my entire life." Ilara traced idle patterns on his skin, considering his words. "This is madness," she replied softly. "We come from different worlds. This can't possibly work." Julian's hand caught hers, stilling her movements. "Don't decide that yet," he urged. "Give us a chance to discover what this could be." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This man, who clearly had everything, was asking for a chance, as if he expected rejection. It made her wonder what experiences had shaped him. "Tell me something real about yourself," she requested, shifting to look into his eyes. "Something you don't tell everyone." Julian was quiet for so long that Ilara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a carefully controlled pain. "I can't father children," he said simply, the words falling between them like stones. "A high fever from a severe infection when I was 30 damaged my reproductive system irreparably." The confession, so personal and clearly painful, touched Ilara deeply. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "My fiancée at the time, Cassandra, was not," he continued, his tone neutral, in a way that suggested practiced control. "She left within a month of the diagnosis. Said she couldn't imagine a life without children, that it was cruel to ask her to stay." Ilara propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. "That must have been devastating." "It was a clarifying experience," he replied with a hint of bitterness. "It taught me what people truly value. Since then, I've been careful about attachments." The admission explained much about him, the initial intensity of his pursuit, followed by the careful restraint he'd shown until tonight. He had been testing her, she realized, waiting for her to demonstrate the same conditional acceptance Cassandra had offered. "Now you," Julian prompted gently, "tell me something real about Ilara Whitestone." She could have shared something inconsequential, but his honesty demanded reciprocity. "My parents died when I was 12, she began, the familiar ache of the memory present but dulled by time. A drunk driver hit them head-on one night. Grandma Beatrice took me in, though she was already in her 60s and living on a modest pension." Julian's hand stroked soothingly along her bare back, encouraging her to continue. "She sold her home to pay for my university tuition," Ilara continued, the weight of old guilt heavy in her voice. "I had a scholarship to the Royal College of Art, but it only covered partial fees. 3 months into my first term, she had her first stroke. The money from selling her house went to her care instead, and I withdrew to look after her." "You've never resented her for it?" Julian asked. "How could I?" Ilara replied. "She sacrificed everything for me after my parents died. It was my turn to sacrifice for her." They were quiet for a moment, absorbing each other's revelations, the intimacy of shared secrets somehow deeper than the physical closeness they had just experienced. "What happens now?" Ilara asked eventually, reality beginning to intrude on their bubble of intimacy. Julian's arms tightened around her. "Now you sleep," he said pragmatically. "In the morning, we'll check on Beatrice, and then we'll see where this leads us." It wasn't a declaration or a promise, but somehow it was enough. Wrapped in his warmth, with the burden of fear and loneliness, temporarily lifted from her shoulders, Ilara allowed herself to drift back to sleep. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Chapter 4. Thorns Among Roses. Julian invited Ilara to Ashbourne Hall, his ancestral estate in the Cotswolds, for a weekend gathering. The invitation came as they sat in Beatrice's small flat, Julian reading Tennyson aloud while Ilara sketched. "It's just a small gathering," he explained. "A few friends, some family. The gardens are in full bloom." Ilara looked up, uncertainty in her eyes. Their relationship had deepened since that night in his townhouse, but they had carefully maintained separation between their worlds. "I'm not sure I would fit in," she said carefully. "That's precisely why I want you there," Julian replied. "I'm tired of people who fit in perfectly but have nothing genuine to offer." When they arrived at Ashbourne Hall, Ilara was struck by the honey-colored stone mansion, rising from meticulously maintained gardens. Inside, Julian showed her to a beautiful bedroom, decorated in soft greens and creams. "I have something to show you," he said, taking her hand. He led her to the third floor, where he opened a door to reveal a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Light flooded the space, illuminating an artist's studio with easels, canvases, and supplies of the highest quality. "This was my mother's studio," Julian explained. "I thought you might use it during your stay." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Ilara reached up to kiss him. What began as gratitude quickly deepened as Julian's arms encircled her waist. He backed her gently against a wall, his body pressing against hers in a way that sent fire through her veins. "We should stop," he murmured against her neck. "Guests will be arriving soon." Ilara agreed, even as her hand slipped beneath his sweater. Julian groaned, capturing her mouth again. "Tonight," he whispered against her lips. After dinner. That evening, Ilara entered the drawing room wearing a simple but elegant midnight blue dress. Julian crossed immediately to her side, his appreciation evident in his gaze. Most guests were welcoming, if reserved. But the atmosphere shifted when a striking blonde woman entered. "Lady Celeste Marwood," the butler announced. The woman swept into the room like she owned it, approaching them with a predatory smile. "Julian, darling," she purred. "How remiss of you not to tell me you had a new friend." Throughout dinner in the formal dining room, Ilara felt Celeste's calculating gaze. The other woman had positioned herself directly across from them. "Tell me, Ilara," Celeste said during the main course. "How did you and Julian meet?" "We met at a bookshop," Ilara said simply. "A bookshop?" Celeste exclaimed. "How quaint. Though I imagined it must have been somewhere special, given Julian's usual social circles. Second cousins once removed," Julian clarified, when Celeste claimed their families had been connected for generations. "And I believe the last time our families were truly connected was when your great-grandfather tried to sell mine a false Rembrandt." Celeste's smile tightened. "Ancient history. Though, speaking of history, Ilara must find all this quite overwhelming. Such a different world from Brixton, isn't it?" The targeted reference to Ilara's neighborhood created a palpable tension. "I find Ashbourne Hall beautiful and welcoming," Ilara replied steadily, "much like its owner." "How loyal," Celeste observed. "Though one wonders if you've discussed all the responsibilities that come with someone in Julian's position. The expectations." Her gaze flickered meaningfully to Ilara's stomach. "The necessities of continuing certain legacies." The implication was unmistakable. Julian's jaw clenched, but Ilara spoke first. "Some legacies are worth more than bloodlines, Lady Marwood," she said quietly. "Kindness, for instance, integrity qualities that seem to transcend generations in some families, while sadly disappearing from others." After dinner, on her way to check on Beatrice, Ilara overheard Celeste speaking to another guest. "She won't last a month," Celeste was saying. "Julian's slumming, that's all. He'll tire of her exotic appeal once reality sets in." "She seems genuinely nice," the other woman protested. "Nice doesn't matter," Celeste dismissed. "She has nothing to offer him. No connections, no proper background, and eventually she'll want children. What then? We all know Julian can't provide that particular necessity." By the time Julian found her an hour later, Ilara had packed her bag. "What are you doing?" he asked, confusion evident. "I think it's best if Grandma Beatrice and I return to London," Ilara said without looking at him. Julian crossed the room and gently took the blouse from her hands. "Why?" "Because I don't belong here," she answered honestly. "Your cousin made that abundantly clear, and she's right. This isn't my world. The only difference that matters is that you're kind and genuine, And most of the people I've known my entire life are neither, Julian countered. Don't let Celeste's jealousy drive you away. It's not just Celeste, Alara insisted. It's everything. The way people looked at me at dinner, the assumptions they made. Since when do you care what people think? Julian challenged. Since it started to affect you, Alara burst out. You deserve someone who fits into your life seamlessly. Who can give you? She broke off abruptly. Julian's expression softened. Someone who can give me children. Is that what this is about? Alara looked away. I heard what Celeste said about your condition, that it's why your previous relationships ended. Nothing, no estate, no legacy, no family name matters more to me than how I feel when I'm with you, he said fiercely. For the first time in years, I feel alive. Alara, you did that. Instead of responding with words, Alara reached for him. Their lips met in a kiss that expressed all the emotions words couldn't convey. Fear, desire, vulnerability, hope. Julian lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, their bodies speaking what their hearts already knew. In the candlelit darkness of the bedroom, he worshipped every inch of her body, whispering promises against her skin. Their passion built slowly, intensely, until they moved together in perfect harmony, their cries of pleasure echoing in the ancient room. Afterward, tangled in silk sheets, Julian held her close. Stay, he whispered. Not just tonight, but in my life. Give us a chance. Looking up at him, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, Alara made her decision. She would not let fear or Celeste's cruelty deny her this chance at happiness. I'll stay, she promised, sealing her words with a kiss that soon rekindled their passion, their bodies joining again and again until dawn began to lighten the sky. Chapter 5. Grandmother's Blessing. A month after the Ashbourne Hall weekend, Alara woke to the sound of her mobile phone ringing in the darkness. Beside her, Julian stirred but didn't wake. They had fallen asleep after making love, his arms still draped protectively across her waist. Hello, she whispered, slipping from beneath his embrace and padding into the hallway of her small flat. Alara, it's Mrs. Langley from next door, came the elderly voice, tight with worry. It's your grandmother. I heard a crash and found her on the bathroom floor. The ambulance is coming, but you should meet us at London Royal. Ice flooded Alara's veins. I'm on my way. When she returned to the bedroom, Julian was already sitting up, instantly alert at the expression on her face. Beatrice, she managed, hands shaking as she searched for clothes. She's collapsed again. Without a word, Julian rose and dressed quickly, making calls while Alara gathered her things. By the time they reached his waiting car, he had arranged for Dr. Harrow to meet them at the hospital. The emergency room was chaotic, but Julian's presence parted the crowd like magic. Within minutes, they found Miss S. Langley in a waiting area, her lined face creased with concern. She was conscious when they took her, the older woman reported. Kept saying she was fine, just dizzy, but her speech was slurred. Love. Dr. Harrow found them soon after, his expression grave. It's another stroke, he confirmed, more severe than the last. We need to act quickly. Over the next 48 hours, Alara barely left the hospital. Julian remained a constant presence, handling details she couldn't process, arranging for specialists, ensuring the best care, even making sure she ate and occasionally rested in the private room he'd somehow secured. On the third night, as Alara dozed in a chair by Beatrice's bed, she woke to the sound of her grandmother's voice. He loves you very much, doesn't he? Alara straightened immediately, relief washing through her at the clarity in Beatrice's eyes. Grandma, you're awake. How do you feel? Don't change the subject, Beatrice chided weakly. That man hasn't left this hospital since they brought me in. Even when you're asleep, he sits in the corridor making calls or reading. Looking toward the door, Alara could see Julian through the small window. His tall frame somehow folded into an uncomfortable chair, head bent over a book. Yes, she admitted softly. I believe he does. Beatrice studied her granddaughter's face. And you? Do you love him? I do, Alara whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. But it's complicated, Grandma. His world is so different from ours. Nonsense, Beatrice said with surprising strength. Love isn't complicated. People make it so. She reached for Alara's hand. Your parents had nothing when they married. Your father was a gardener's son, your mother from a good Cambridge family. Her parents disowned her. You know. Alara stared at her grandmother. I didn't know that. They came around eventually when your mother refused to regret her choice, Beatrice continued. They realized that happiness matters more than matching backgrounds. She paused, gathering strength. Bring him in here. When Julian entered, Beatrice gestured for him to sit beside Alara. Young man, she began, her voice steady despite her weakened state. I understand you're quite wealthy. Julian looked startled but answered honestly. Yes, Mrs. Whitestone, entitled, I suppose. A baronetcy, he admitted. Nothing particularly impressive. Beatrice snorted. Rich and modest, interesting combination. Her gaze turned shrewd. Do you love my granddaughter? Julian didn't hesitate. More than I thought possible. H.M., Beatrice murmured. And what do you intend to do about it? Grandma, Alara protested. This isn't appropriate. I'm old and ill, Beatrice retorted. Appropriate is a luxury I can no longer afford. She fixed Julian with a penetrating stare. Well, I intend to spend my life making her happy, Julian answered simply. If she'll allow it. Beatrice studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Help me sit up, Alara, she instructed. Once upright, Beatrice slowly worked a gold ring from her finger, a simple band with a small but perfect emerald. This was your mother's, she told Alara, and her mother's before that. The emerald came from Jamaica, brought by your great-great-grandfather when he immigrated to England. She pressed the ring into Julian's palm, closing his fingers around it. A family should have traditions, she said meaningfully, even new ones. Julian's throat worked visibly as he accepted the token. I'll treasure it, he promised. See that you do, Beatrice replied. Now, both of you, go home and get proper rest. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Outside Beatrice's room, Alara turned to Julian, emotion making her voice unsteady. You don't have to, he silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. I know, he said softly. But I want to. Not yet, perhaps, but when you're ready. That night, in Alara's tiny flat, with its mismatched furniture and faded wallpaper, Julian made love to her with a new tenderness. Each touch, each kiss seemed infused with deeper meaning after Beatrice's unexpected blessing. I was so afraid of losing her, Alara whispered in the darkness, her body still trembling from their lovemaking. She's all the family I have left. Julian gathered her closer, his skin warm against hers. Not anymore, he murmured into her hair. You have me now, if you want me. In response, Alara rose above him, the amber light from the street lamp outside casting her beautiful body in gold. Julian's breath caught as she lowered herself onto him again, their bodies joining in the most primal expression of connection. This time, their lovemaking was slower, more deliberate, each movement a promise, each sigh a vow. As pleasure built between them, Alara gazed into Julian's eyes, allowing herself to believe in the possibility of their future together. When release finally claimed them both, it felt like a beginning rather than an end. Later, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Julian retrieved Beatrice's ring from his discarded jacket. I'll keep this safe, he told Alara, till the day you're ready for me to offer it properly. Alara traced the emerald with a gentle finger, the stone catching the dim light. My mother always said it brought good fortune to true love, she said softly, that as long as it remained in our family, love would prevail over circumstance. A beautiful sentiment, Julian replied, his voice thoughtful, and fitting, I think. He placed the ring in the small wooden box Alara kept on her nightstand among her few treasures. The gesture respectful, patient, understanding touched her deeply. The doctor said Beatrice is recovering more quickly than expected, Julian observed, changing the subject as if sensing Alara's emotional overload. Dr. Harrow is particularly optimistic. I noticed him visiting outside of his rounds, Alara said, grateful for the shift in conversation. He seems to have taken a special interest in her case. Julian smiled mysteriously. Felix has always had excellent taste. What do you mean? Alara asked, curious. I believe he finds your grandmother quite fascinating, Julian replied with amusement. He mentioned her extraordinary spirit at least 3 times today. Alara laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. Grandma would eat him alive. Perhaps, Julian agreed, but I suspect he might enjoy the experience. As they drifted towards sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Alara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the differences in their backgrounds, the complications of blending their lives, they would face them together. Outside, the London rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for the morning to come. Inside the modest flat, Beatrice's emerald ring caught the occasional flash of lightning, its green fire, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Chapter 6. The Proposal. As spring turned to early summer, Beatrice's health steadily improved. Dr. Harrow Felix, as he insisted Alara and Beatrice call him, had become a regular visitor to their flat, ostensibly to monitor Beatrice's recovery, but increasingly lingering for tea and conversation. "He's quite taken with you," Alara observed one afternoon after Felix had departed, leaving behind a rare first edition of poetry he thought Beatrice might enjoy. "Nonsense," her grandmother replied, though her pleased expression betrayed her. "He's simply a conscientious physician." Julian, witnessing this exchange from the small kitchen, where he was preparing dinner, a surprisingly domestic skill he'd revealed, recently smiled knowingly at Alara. Their silent communication had become effortless, a glance conveying what once required words. Later that evening, as they walked through Regent's Park in the golden light of sunset, Julian seemed unusually thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" Alara asked, her hand comfortably entwined with his. "I've been thinking about taking some time away," he replied. "From London, from work, perhaps somewhere beautiful and remote." Alara felt a momentary pang of concern. "Alone?" Julian squeezed her hand reassuringly. "With you, of course, if you can arrange time off from the publishing house." "Grandma Beatrice," Alara began, "would be well looked after," Julian finished. "I believe Felix would be more than willing to keep a close eye on her. In fact, I suspect he'd consider it a privilege rather than a duty." Alara laughed, acknowledging the truth in his observation. "Where did you have in mind?" "Scotland," Julian answered. "The Isle of Skye, specifically. My family has a cottage there. Nothing grand like Ashbourne, just a simple stone house overlooking a loch. It's where I go when I need clarity." Something in his tone made Alara's heart quicken. "And you need clarity now?" Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. "No," he said softly. "For the first time in my life, I have perfect clarity. But I think you might benefit from some distance from London, from our daily lives, to gain your own." 2 weeks later, after ensuring Beatrice was comfortable with the arrangement, she had practically pushed them out the door. Felix hovering solicitously nearby, they arrived on Skye as evening approached. The cottage, reached by a winding single-track road, stood on a rocky promontory overlooking a steel-gray loch. "It's magnificent," Alara breathed, as they stepped from the Range Rover Julian had hired in Inverness. The wind carried the scent of heather and salt, and distant mountains rose purple against the sky. "It's been in my family for over 200 years, Julian explained, as he unlocked the weathered oak door. "Originally a shepherd's cottage, though it's been expanded and modernized over time." Inside, the cottage was an unexpected blend of rustic charm and subtle luxury. Thick stone walls and exposed beams complemented by comfortable furniture and modern amenities. A massive fireplace dominated the main living area, already laid with logs. Julian moved around the space with practiced ease, lighting the fire and opening a bottle of wine while Alara explored. Despite its modest size compared to Ashbourne Hall, the cottage felt equally authentic to Julian's character, perhaps even more so. Here, away from social expectations and family history, she sensed a different side of him emerging. "How long has it been since you visited?" she asked, accepting a glass of rich red wine. "Almost 3 years," he admitted. "Not since before my illness." They hadn't discussed his condition often since her discovery at Ashbourne. Alara knew the subject remained painful for him, a reminder of both physical vulnerability and personal rejection. "Why now?" she asked gently. Julian's expression grew thoughtful as he gazed into the growing flames. "This place has always represented beginnings for me," he explained. "My father first brought me here when I was 11 after my mother died. We spent a month fishing, hiking, simply being together away from condolences and expectations. It was here that I began to heal." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I wanted to share it with you because this is the most honest version of myself. No ancestral portraits watching, no family reputation to uphold, just me as I am." The simplicity of his statement touched Alara deeply. Setting aside her glass, she crossed to where he stood and rose on tiptoes to kiss him a kiss of understanding and acceptance that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Julian responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist to lift her closer. The journey had kept them apart for many hours, and the emotional significance of the cottage seemed to intensify their need for connection. As the fire crackled beside them, illuminating their entwined figures, clothing was swiftly discarded. "I've been wanting you since we left London," Julian murmured against her neck, his hands tracing the curves of her body with reverent hunger. Alara laughed softly, the sound transforming into a gasp as his mouth found the sensitive spot beneath her ear. The driver might have objected to any earlier demonstration of that fact. In response, Julian lifted her into his arms and carried her to the plush rug before the fireplace, laying her down with deliberate gentleness. He knelt between her thighs, his gaze traveling over her body with undisguised appreciation. "You are the most beautiful thing that has ever been in this cottage," he said softly. Their lovemaking was unhurried, a careful exploration that built slowly toward release. When they finally lay spent in each other's arms, the fire burning low beside them, Alara felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with physical location. Over the next 5 days, they fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings spent hiking the dramatic landscape, afternoons exploring ancient ruins or tiny fishing villages, evenings devoted to conversation and love. Each day, Alara watched Julian relax further, revealing sides of himself she hadn't glimpsed in London. On their 6th evening, as misty twilight descended over the loch, Julian suggested a walk to a nearby stone circle that dated from Neolithic times. "It's particularly beautiful at sunset," he explained as they followed a narrow path through blooming heather. "The stones catch the last light in a way that seems almost deliberate." When they reached the circle's 7 massive stones, arranged with mathematical precision, the sky was painted in shades of amber and rose. Julian led Alara to the center, where a flat altar stone lay partially covered with moss. These were sacred places, he told her, his voice low as if respecting ancient rituals, sites of ceremony, celebration, connection to forces greater than human understanding. Alara touched one of the standing stones, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers and imagining the hands that had shaped it thousands of years earlier. "It's humbling," she agreed, "to think of how briefly we exist in comparison." Julian took her hand, drawing her attention back to him. In the fading light, his expression was both nervous and determined, a combination she had never seen on his usually confident face. "Perhaps that's why love matters so much," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "Because in our brief existence, finding someone who truly sees us, accepts us, chooses us despite our flaws, it's the closest thing to eternity we can experience." As he spoke, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Alara's breath caught as he opened it to reveal Beatrice's emerald ring, now polished and set in a new platinum band that enhanced its beauty without diminishing its history. "I've had it resized," he explained softly, "but otherwise untouched. Your family's legacy preserved." Dropping to one knee on the ancient stone, he looked up at her with naked vulnerability. "Alara Whitestone, you found me when I was dying, not just physically that day in the bookshop, but spiritually, emotionally. You saved me with your honesty, your courage, your refusal to let circumstances dictate who you love." He took a breath, seeming to gather courage. "I know we come from different worlds. I know there will be challenges, but I also know that nothing in my life has ever felt as right as loving you." His voice dropped to an almost whisper. "Will you marry me? Will you create a new legacy with me, one based on love rather than bloodlines or social expectations?" The setting sun broke briefly through the mist, casting golden light across the stone circle. In that moment of illumination, Alara saw not just the man before her, but the journey that had brought them together, the chance encounter, the mutual recognition, the obstacles overcome, and those still to face. She thought of Beatrice's words about her parents, about love transcending circumstance. She thought of the connection she and Julian had formed, defying explanation or expectation. Mostly, she thought of how completely he had revealed himself to her, his vulnerabilities alongside his strengths, his fears alongside his hopes. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear in the ancient sacred space. "Yes, I will marry you." Julian's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Rising, he gathered her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment. That night, in the cottage's large 4-poster bed, they made love with a new awareness of their shared future. Each caress seemed to hold deeper meaning, each whispered endearment, a promise that extended beyond the moment. As moonlight spilled through the window, painting their entwined bodies in silver, Julian traced the curve of Alara's hip with reverent fingers. "There's something I haven't told you," he said quietly. "Something medical." Alara propped herself on one elbow, concerned by his serious tone. "What is it?" Felix has been consulting with specialists about my condition, Julian explained. There are new treatments being developed, experimental still, but showing promise. Hope and caution warred in his voice, and Alara understood immediately the magnitude of what he was sharing, not just medical information, but the vulnerable dream he had nearly abandoned. You mean you might be able to? She couldn't finish the sentence, afraid of igniting false hope. Father children, he completed gently. It's far from certain. The treatments are cutting edge with limited success rates. But Felix thinks I'm a good candidate. Alara placed her palm against his cheek, meeting his gaze directly. Julian, I said yes, knowing children might never be possible for us. That hasn't changed. I know, he assured her. And I'm not telling you this to pressure you or create expectations. I'm telling you because I want our marriage to begin with complete honesty, no secrets, no unspoken hopes or fears between us. The gesture, his refusal to shield her from uncertainty, or himself from potential disappointment, touched Alara deeply. Lowering her lips to his, she poured all her love into a kiss that soon rekindled their passion. As their bodies joined again, moving together with practiced familiarity, yet perpetual discovery, Alara whispered against his shoulder, "Whatever happens, it's enough. You are enough." In the heart of ancient Scotland, surrounded by landscapes that had witnessed centuries of human joy and sorrow, they found sanctuary in each other, past and future merging in the eternal present of their love. Chapter 7. Against all odds. London autumn painted Hyde Park in shades of copper and gold as Alara and Julian strolled hand in hand beneath a canopy of falling leaves. 3 months had passed since their engagement in Scotland, months filled with quiet happiness and preparations for their December wedding. Beatrice has invited Felix to Sunday lunch again, Alara remarked, amusement coloring her voice. That makes the 4th time this month. Julian chuckled, the sound warm in the crisp October air. I think we may need to consider a double wedding at this rate. Their laughter faded as Julian suddenly stopped walking, his free hand rising to his temple. Alara turned to him, concern immediately replacing her smile. Julian, what is it? Just a headache, he assured her, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. I've been getting them occasionally. Nothing serious. Alara studied his face, noting the pallor beneath his usual healthy complexion. This isn't the first time, is it? And don't try to protect me from the truth. No, he admitted reluctantly. They started about 2 weeks ago, along with some other symptoms. Alarm flashed through Alara. What symptoms? Why haven't you said anything? Julian guided her to a nearby bench, his expression carefully controlled. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. Felix believes there are side effects from the treatment protocol. Julian, Alara said firmly, tell me everything now. He sighed, recognizing the determination in her tone. Fatigue, occasional dizziness, and some discomfort in the abdominal region. His hand unconsciously moved to the area of his old surgical scar. All expected reactions to the stem cell therapy and hormone regulation, according to Felix. And you didn't think I should know this? Alara's voice softened with concern rather than accusation. Julian captured her hand between both of his. The protocol has been producing promising results. I didn't want to burden you with the temporary discomfort when the potential outcome means so much to both of us. Alara's fingers tightened around his, fear and love warring within her. They had found each other against impossible odds. Surely fate wouldn't be cruel enough to threaten their happiness now. We're partners, she reminded him gently. Your burdens are mine to share. Julian's monthly appointment with Felix turned into a comprehensive examination, followed by blood tests and scans that left him feeling like a medical curiosity. Alara insisted on accompanying him despite his protests, her presence both comfort and motivation to maintain a brave facade. They waited for Felix in his private office, Alara opening her sketchbook, pencil moving with practiced ease across the paper. Since their return from Scotland, she had found herself drawn back to art with renewed passion, filling sketchbooks with impressions and emotions that words couldn't express. Julian watched her work, fascinated by the emergence of his own likeness. On the page, not a simple portrait, but a study in hope and uncertainty, capturing his emotional state with uncanny precision. How do you see so clearly? He asked softly. Alara glanced up, her pencil pausing. I don't just look with my eyes, she explained. I've always been able to see what people feel. She turned the sketchbook toward him more fully. This is how you look when you think no one is watching. Caught between hope and fear. The door opened before Julian could respond, Felix entering with a thick folder, and an expression Julian found impossible to read. "Sorry to keep you waiting," the physician said, settling behind his desk. "I wanted to consult with Dr. Chen at Johns Hopkins before our meeting." "Well?" Julian asked, his patience exhausted. "What's the verdict?" Felix looked up, his professional demeanor giving way to visible astonishment. "The results are remarkable, Julian. Your hormone levels show significant normalization, and the ultrasound reveals actual tissue regeneration in previously damaged areas." "Meaning?" Alara pressed, her hand finding Julian's. "Meaning," Felix continued carefully, "that the experimental protocol is working far better than we anticipated. The combination of targeted stem cell therapy and hormonal regulation appears to be reversing damage we believed permanent." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stared at his friend, unwilling to process the implications. "How certain are you?" he finally asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "The indicators are extremely positive," Felix replied, opening the folder to show charts and images neither Julian nor Alara could interpret, but whose significance was clear from Felix's expression. "I would estimate a 60 to 70% chance of full reproductive function returning within 6 to 12 months, based on the current rate of cellular regeneration." "And the headaches, the pain?" Alara asked. "Side effects of the rapid hormonal changes," Felix explained. "They should subside as his body adjusts to the new equilibrium. We can manage them with medication in the meantime." Julian finally turned to Alara, finding her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This doesn't change anything about us," he said softly. "I need you to know that." "I know," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "But it changes something for you, doesn't it? A possibility you'd surrendered." The drive back to Julian's townhouse passed in contemplative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Upon arriving home, Julian excused himself to make several calls, his composed businessman persona firmly in place, despite the emotional upheaval within. Left alone, Alara wandered to the sunroom, where she had set up a small studio space at Julian's insistence. An easel stood by the windows, afternoon light illuminating the canvas she had begun working on several weeks earlier, her first serious painting since abandoning art school. The piece was abstract yet evocative, swirls of blue and gold, merging and separating across the canvas, suggesting two distinct energies finding harmony. She had started it after their engagement, unable to express through words the profound connection she felt with Julian. Now, picking up a brush and squeezing fresh paint onto her palette, she added new elements, small flecks of crimson energy emerging from the meeting point of blue and gold, suggesting possibilities yet to be realized. Hours passed as she worked, channeling her emotional turmoil into creation. She didn't hear Julian enter until his hands gently came to rest on her shoulders. "It's beautiful," he murmured, studying the evolved painting. "What does it represent?" Alara set down her brush, suddenly self-conscious. "Us," she admitted. "The blue is you, the gold is me, and now these new elements emerging between us." Julian's arms encircled her waist, drawing her back against his chest. "Hope," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "You've painted hope." Turning in his embrace, Alara found his expression unguarded for the first time since receiving Felix's news. Vulnerability and fear mingled with tentative joy. "I don't know how to feel," he confessed, the careful composure finally cracking. "For 5 years, I've accepted this limitation, built my life around it. I nearly didn't pursue you because of it." Alara watched him, allowing him the space to process. "And now I'm afraid to hope," he admitted, moving away to pace before the windows. "Afraid that if I allow myself to believe this, to imagine a future with children of our own, it will be taken away again. I couldn't bear another loss like that." Alara rose and crossed to him, her hands gentle as they framed his face. "Whatever happens, Julian, we face it together," she promised. "If this miracle comes to pass, we'll embrace it gratefully. If not, we'll have a beautiful life, regardless." The simple wisdom of her words penetrated the chaos of his emotions. Bending his head, Julian captured her lips in a kiss that quickly deepened from gratitude to desire. Their connection had always been intensely physical from the first touch, as if their bodies recognized each other even when their minds harbored doubts. Now, with new possibility humming between them, their need for connection grew urgent. Julian lifted Alara onto his desk, papers scattering unheeded as he pressed between her thighs, his mouth never leaving hers. Clothes were hastily removed, caution abandoned in favor of immediate gratification. When he finally entered her, Julian felt a new awareness, a consciousness of what their joining might now create. The thought sent unprecedented intensity through him as they moved together, their passion both an affirmation of their bond and an expression of newfound hope. 3 days later, as Alara arranged autumn flowers in the drawing room, the doorbell rang. Harrison, who had accompanied Julian from Ashbourne to serve in the London house, announced a visitor. "Lady Celeste Marwood, madam." Alara stiffened, turning to face her nemesis with as much composure as she could muster. Celeste stood in the doorway, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Whitestone," she greeted formally. "Or should I say, the future Miss S. Ashbourne." "Lady Marwood," Alara acknowledged. "Julian isn't home at present." "I'm aware," Celeste replied, stepping further into the room. "I timed my visit deliberately to speak with you privately." Alarm bells rang in Alara's mind, but she maintained outward calm. "Please sit down. Would you like tea?" Celeste declined the seat, but accepted the tea, taking the cup with practiced grace. "My brother Edward telephoned me yesterday," she said without preamble. "He'd heard from the family solicitors that Julian has been undergoing some experimental medical treatment." Alara kept her expression carefully neutral. "I don't believe Julian's medical matters are appropriate topics for gossip." A hint of the old sharpness flashed in Celeste's eyes, quickly suppressed. "No, they're not. But they are matters of significant interest to our branch of the family, as I am sure you understand." She set down her teacup precisely. "Edward's son has been raised to expect the Ashbourne inheritance, and now that expectation may be premature," Alara concluded, understanding dawning. Celeste didn't deny it. "I came to assess the situation for myself." "You mean to assess me," Alara corrected gently, "to determine if I might be convinced to discourage Julian from continuing his treatments." Surprise flickered across Celeste's face. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for, and you're more transparent than you believe," Alara countered without rancor. "But you've wasted your journey. Julian's medical decisions are his own, and I support whatever choice brings him peace." Celeste studied her for a long moment. "You truly love him," she said finally, something like reluctant respect in her voice. "Not his position or fortune, but him." "I do," Alara confirmed simply. A strange expression crossed Celeste's face, almost wistful. "I envy that," she admitted unexpectedly. "My own marriage was a business arrangement that failed spectacularly." The vulnerability in this admission surprised Alara, revealing dimensions to Celeste she hadn't glimpsed before. "Perhaps there's room for multiple forms of legacy," Alara suggested carefully. "Ashbourne and its entailments are only one type of inheritance." Celeste's laugh held little humor. "You sound like Julian's mother. She used to say much the same thing." She gathered her gloves, preparing to leave. "I won't pretend to wish you happiness, Miss Whitestone, but I do wish you honesty in your marriage. It's worth more than titles or estates." As Harrison showed Celeste out, Alara returned to her flower arrangement, mind swirling with this unexpected interaction. She had glimpsed, however briefly, the woman beneath the polished aristocratic facade, someone who had made choices according to family expectations rather than personal desires, and found emptiness as a result. Later that evening, as she related the strange visit to Julian, she was surprised by his thoughtful reaction. Celeste wasn't always so cold, he reflected, swirling brandy in his glass as they sat before the fire. "As children, we were actually quite close. She was brilliant, passionate about history and architecture. Then she was matched with Lord Marwood when she was 21 and everything changed." "What happened?" Alara asked. "He was 3 decades her senior, brutal in his expectations, and unfaithful from the beginning," Julian said grimly. "The divorce nearly destroyed her family financially and socially. Since then, she's been obsessed with security, and Ashbourne represents the ultimate security in her mind." Understanding dawned in Alara's eyes. "So her hostility toward me was never truly about you," Julian confirmed, "but about what you represented, another threat to what she perceives as her family's lifeline." This insight gave Alara a new perspective on their antagonist, transforming her from villain to complex human, whose circumstances had narrowed her choices and hardened her heart. "Perhaps someday we can reach an understanding with her," Alara suggested. "Not friendship, but peace." Julian smiled, once again amazed by his fiancée's capacity for compassion. "Your ability to see the best in people is one of the many reasons I love you," he said, setting aside his glass to pull her into his arms. As they made love that night, slowly and tenderly in contrast to their earlier passionate encounter. Julian whispered promises against Ilara's skin, of love unconditional, of partnership absolute, of a future shared regardless of what medical miracles might or might not come to pass. Later, as Ilara drifted toward sleep in his arms, Julian remained awake, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across their entwined bodies. For the first time since receiving Felix's news, he allowed himself to truly hope, not just for restored fertility, but for the family he had once believed forever beyond his reach. Chapter 8. Winter's Magic. Snow fell in gentle flurries outside St. Margaret's Abbey on December 20. Honest, the winter solstice, a day of emerging light from darkness that Julian had chosen with deliberate symbolism. Inside, centuries-old stone walls glowed with the warmth of hundreds of candles, illuminating the intimate gathering of family and close friends. Before the ceremony, Felix visited Julian in a small antechamber, where he adjusted his formal attire with nervous precision. "Your latest results came in this morning," Felix said, handing him a sealed envelope. "I thought you might want to know today." Julian's hand stilled on his tie. "Tell me." "Continued improvement," Felix confirmed. "The tissue regeneration is progressing even more rapidly than we projected." He smiled at his friend. "Consider it a wedding gift from medical science." Julian absorbed this news with quiet gratitude as he completed his preparations. When he took his place at the altar minutes later, his composure was perfect, except for the slight tremor in his hands, the invincible man vulnerable on this most important day. When the music changed and Ilara appeared at the entrance, Julian felt his breath catch. She wore an elegantly simple ivory gown that emphasized her graceful figure, carrying winter roses and holly berries. Her artistic sensibility had influenced every element of the ceremony, from the balanced composition of flowers to the precise placement of candles that created a golden path toward the altar. As she walked toward him on Felix's arm, a role he had accepted, with misty-eyed honor, when asked, Julian saw not just her physical beauty, but the journey that had brought them here, from a chance medical emergency to this deliberate, chosen union. In the front pew, Beatrice watched with undisguised joy, resplendent in royal blue silk, her recovery evident in her bright eyes and straight posture. Beside her sat Felix's empty place, the two having grown inseparable in recent months, their shared medical backgrounds forming an unexpected foundation for deep companionship. When Ilara reached him, Julian took her hands and spoke the words they had written together. "I come to you not as a man who has everything, but as one who found his greatest treasure in the most unexpected place. You saw me at my weakest and gave me strength. You faced my darkest truth and offered light. I vow to honor the miracle of finding you with every day we share." Ilara's eyes glistened as she responded, her clear voice carrying through the hushed abbey. "I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings, to create beauty from challenge, to find strength in vulnerability, and to remember always that love is the greatest artwork we will ever create together. What began as chance, I now claim as choice, to be your partner, your equal, your home." As they exchanged rings, his grandmother's diamond joining Beatrice's emerald on Ilara's finger, the abbey bells began to toll, marking the exact moment of solstice. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar declared. "What God has joined together, let no one put asunder." Their first kiss as a married couple conveyed more than words ever could, a promise, a commitment, a beginning. The reception at Ashbourne Hall transformed the austere Great Hall into a winter wonderland. From her seat beside Julian at the head table, Ilara observed the gathering with an artist's eye, the composition of guests, the play of light on crystal, the contrast of ancient oak against fresh flowers. "You've made some changes to the family gallery," she noted quietly to Julian, having spotted the difference during their arrival. He smiled, pleased she had noticed. "I had my mother's self-portrait brought down from storage and hung in the central position. The first of many changes, I hope." Ilara understood the significance. A quiet revolution against centuries of tradition that valued only male contributions to the Ashbourne legacy. Julian's hand found hers beneath the table. "One day your work will hang there too." The declaration, so certain, so accepting of her artistic identity, touched her deeply. Before she could respond, they were called for their first dance. As they moved together across the floor, Ilara was acutely aware of significant absences. Lady Celeste Marwood had received but not acknowledged her invitation, a peace offering Julian had extended, despite Ilara's reservations. Her absence spoke volumes about unresolved tensions that still simmered beneath the surface of family politics. "Are you disappointed she didn't come?" Ilara asked softly. Julian's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours," he said simply. "And perhaps Beatrice's," he added with a smile, nodding toward where his new grandmother-in-law was deep in animated conversation with Felix. "I believe we're about to be usurped as the romantic focus of the family," Ilara observed with amusement. Their honeymoon journey began that evening with a chartered flight to Paris, the first stop in a carefully planned European tour. Their suite at the Ritz overlooked twinkling city lights, champagne chilled in silver, and rose petals adorned the turned-down bed. "Miss S. Ashbourne," Julian whispered, slowly unfastening the buttons of her silk blouse while maintaining eye contact that quickened her breath. Ilara's fingers were equally busy with his clothing. "I've been imagining this moment since we said goodbye last night." Their lovemaking took on new significance, no longer lovers, but husband and wife, bound by vows and promises publicly declared. The intensity of their connection had only deepened with each challenge overcome, each barrier dismantled between them. From Paris, they traveled to a chateau in the snow-covered French Alps, then to Venice and Florence. Ilara experienced these iconic cities through dual perspectives. Her artistic training, which recognized brushstrokes in Botticelli's masterpieces and techniques in Venetian glass, alongside her emotional response to beauty, shared with the man she loved. In Florence's Uffizi Gallery, Julian watched her studying a particular Renaissance painting with intense concentration, her expression revealing professional assessment rather than tourist appreciation. "You see things differently," he observed. "Technical elements I would never notice." "It's how I was trained," she explained, pointing to brush techniques invisible to untrained eyes, to deconstruct beauty into its components while still appreciating the whole, like you do with people, Julian suggested, seeing layers beneath the surface. Ilara considered this thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's why I recognized something in you that first day, beneath the medical emergency, some essential quality that felt." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Familiar," Julian supplied, "as if we'd known each other before." By the time they reached their final destination, a private villa on the Amalfi Coast, they had settled into the rhythm of married life while maintaining the passionate connection that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On their final evening, Julian arranged a surprise, their bedroom transformed with candles, flowers, and the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. "What are you doing?" Ilara asked, turning to him with a smile. "I wanted something special for our last night," he admitted, guiding her toward the waiting bed. Their lovemaking was unhurried, a leisurely exploration rather than urgent passion. Julian took his time worshipping every inch of Ilara's body, drawing gasps and sighs with knowing touches, his mouth and hands skilled from learning her most sensitive places. When he finally entered her, the familiar connection felt somehow new, deeper, more significant. As they moved together toward release, Ilara gazed up at her husband, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion that transcended physical pleasure. "I don't want this to end," she whispered. "Not just tonight, but this time together, away from everything." "Nothing is ending," Julian promised, his rhythm steady and deliberate. "Everything is just beginning." As they reached completion together, Ilara felt unexpectedly emotional, a profound sense of rightness and completion that brought tears to her eyes. Later, as Julian slept beside her, Ilara gazed out at the Mediterranean moonlight painting silver patterns across their terrace. She felt different somehow, though she couldn't articulate exactly how. Something fundamental had shifted within her, beyond the change in marital status or the culmination of their journey. Placing a hand on her flat stomach, she wondered if their story was already expanding in ways they hadn't yet recognized. The moon cast silver light across their bed as Ilara drifted toward sleep, a sense of peaceful anticipation settling over her like a blessing. Chapter 9. Whispers of Miracle. February brought relentless rain to London, turning the city into a watercolor painting of blurred lights and reflective pavements. In the master bathroom of their Kensington townhouse, a wedding gift from Julian Ilara stared at the small plastic stick in her trembling hand, hardly daring to believe the two pink lines that had appeared. 6 weeks had passed since their return from Italy. Subtle changes had accumulated gradually: sensitivity to certain smells, unusual fatigue, and finally a missed cycle she had initially attributed to travel an adjustment to married life. For the past week, she had found herself sketching nursery layouts in her private journal without fully understanding her own impulse. The bathroom door opened slowly, revealing Julian's concerned face. "Ilara, you've been in here for 20 minutes. Are you?" His words died as he registered what she was holding. For a moment that seemed to stretch eternally, they stared at each other in stunned silence. Then, with a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob, Ilara held out the test. "I think," she said, her voice unsteady, "that your body has been healing even more effectively than Felix predicted." Julian crossed the room in 2 strides, taking the test from her hand with reverence. "You're pregnant," he whispered, the question unnecessary but essential to process the revelation. Ilara nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I need to see a doctor to confirm, but yes, I believe I am." For a man typically eloquent and composed, Julian's reaction was beautifully unrestrained. A strangled cry escaped him as he dropped to his knees before Ilara, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "A child," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Ilara's hands cradled his head, her fingers threading through his hair as her own tears fell freely. "The miracle we didn't dare expect," she agreed softly. When Julian finally looked up, his face was transformed with a joy so pure it made Ilara's heart ache. Rising to his feet, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to their bedroom, laying her gently on the crisp white duvet as if she had suddenly become precious crystal. "Julian," she laughed through her tears. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. You're carrying our child," he corrected, his eyes never leaving hers as he stretched out beside her. "The most precious thing in my universe." Their lovemaking that morning was unlike any they had shared before, tender, almost worshipful, with Julian treating her body as a temple housing the most sacred gift. When they lay entwined afterward, the rain pattering against the windows created a cocoon of peaceful isolation around them. "We should call Felix," Ilara said eventually, her head resting on Julian's chest. "He'll want to monitor the pregnancy closely, given the circumstances." Julian nodded, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "And Beatrice should be the first to know after him. She'll be insufferably smug," Ilara predicted with a smile. "She's been dropping hints about great-grandchildren since before the wedding." The following week found them in Felix's private medical office, Ilara lying on an examination table while a technician moved an ultrasound wand across her gel-covered abdomen. Julian stood beside her, gripping her hand so tightly it almost hurt, both of them staring anxiously at the grainy black and white screen. Felix studied the images with professional detachment that didn't quite mask his personal investment in this particular case. "Everything looks excellent for approximately 7 weeks gestation," he assured them. "Perfectly positioned, strong heartbeat." He paused, frowning slightly as he moved the wand to a different angle. "That's interesting," he murmured. "What?" Julian and Ilara asked simultaneously, tension immediately escalating. Instead of answering immediately, Felix adjusted some settings on the machine, his focus intense. Then, with a smile breaking through his professional demeanor, he turned the screen toward them. "Do you see this?" he asked, pointing to a pulsing shape. "That's your baby's heartbeat." His finger moved slightly. "And this is your other baby's heartbeat." The silence that followed was absolute. Ilara stared at the screen, unable to process what she was seeing. "Twins," Julian finally managed, his voice barely audible. "Fraternal twins," Felix confirmed. "2 separate embryos, both appearing perfectly healthy at this stage." Ilara felt the room tilt slightly, Julian's steady hand on her shoulder the only anchor keeping her from floating away in shock. "But how?" she began, then stopped, the question absurd even as it formed. Felix's expression was a mixture of scientific fascination and genuine delight. "Looking at Julian's latest test results and the timing of conception, it appears the regenerative protocol reached optimal effectiveness just as you returned from your honeymoon. The probability of twins, however, was not increased by the treatment that appears to be simply remarkable timing, or perhaps genetic predisposition we weren't aware of." "2 children," Julian whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen in wonder. "2 boys. If my initial assessment is correct," Felix added, though it's still early to be certain. Later, in the privacy of their car, Ilara finally gave in to the laughter that had been building inside her, slightly hysterical, but genuinely joyful. "Twins," she repeated, the words simultaneously terrifying and wonderful. 2 babies, Julian. He reached across to take her hand, his expression still dazed. Not just children, but a family in a single moment, he marveled. When the universe decides to correct an injustice, it apparently does so emphatically. That evening, over a special dinner at Beatrice's favorite restaurant, they shared the news with her. The elderly woman's reaction was everything they had anticipated. Initial shock followed by tearful joy that transformed quickly into practical planning. "The 3rd bedroom in your townhouse should be the nursery," she declared, already rearranging their lives. "It gets the morning sun, which is ideal for babies, and you'll need a proper night nurse at first. Twin infants are no small undertaking." Julian listened with amused tolerance, but Ilara could see the emotion beneath his composed exterior, the profound gratitude that Beatrice would be present to see her great-grandchildren, to impart wisdom and family stories that would have otherwise been lost. Felix, who had joined them for the celebration, watched Beatrice with unmistakable admiration. Their relationship had evolved in recent months, from medical consultations to theater outings and now regular Sunday teas. Without being obvious, he positioned himself beside her throughout the evening, his attention never straying far. "You've made an unexpected conquest," Julian murmured to Ilara, as they observed the pair deep in conversation about the proper age to introduce children to Shakespeare. "Not unexpected at all," Ilara countered. "Two intelligent, passionate people who value knowledge and have experienced life's challenges. It makes perfect sense." The following morning brought an unexpected delivery, a small, exquisitely wrapped package addressed to Ilara. Inside lay a delicate silver locket containing a miniature reproduction of the Ashbourne family crest, accompanied by a note in elegant script: "Traditions evolve, bloodlines continue. May your children honor both their heritage and their remarkable mother, Lady Celeste Marwood." Julian read the note over Ilara's shoulder, his expression complex. "An olive branch," he observed. "One I never expected. Should I accept it?" Ilara asked, uncertain. "The choice is yours," Julian replied, "but I believe people can change when given reason to." After consideration, Ilara penned a simple response: "Thank you for your kindness. The children will know all branches of their family tree." Ilara. That night, as they prepared for bed, Julian came up behind Ilara at her vanity table, his hands gently cupping the almost imperceptible swell of her abdomen. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. Ilara met his eyes in the mirror. "For what?" "For saving my life that day in the bookshop," he answered simply. "For giving me a reason to live. For carrying our children." His voice broke slightly on the final word. "For everything." Turning in his arms, Ilara rose to kiss him deeply, pouring all her love and hope into the connection. The kiss quickly kindled familiar desire, heightened by the knowledge of the new lives growing within her. Their passion, temporarily restrained by earlier shock and medical concerns, resurged with renewed intensity. Julian lifted Ilara onto the vanity, scattering perfume bottles and makeup brushes with careless abandon as his hands moved beneath her silk nightgown. "Is this safe?" he murmured against her throat, even as his fingers traced paths that made her gasp. "The babies," Felix said. "Normal activity is fine," Ilara assured him, her own hands busy with the drawstring of his pajama bottoms. "Essential even, for my well-being." When they came together, the physical pleasure was amplified by the emotional significance of their connection, the tangible evidence of their love now growing within Ilara, defying medical certainty and statistical probability. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Julian's hand rested protectively over her stomach. "What shall we name them?" he asked softly. "Our miracle twins." Ilara smiled in the darkness. "For 2 boys, I've always loved the name Theodore, perhaps paired with Nathaniel, after your grandfather. Theodore and Nathaniel Ashbourne." Julian tested the combination. Distinguished, strong, perfect together. They drifted to sleep discussing middle names and godparents. Julian's arm protectively around Ilara, their hands joined over the tiny lives they had created against impossible odds. Chapter 10. Love's Greatest Gift. Spring transformed London by mid-April, just as Ilara's pregnancy reached the 34th week. Her slender frame had adapted remarkably to accommodate the growing twins, though Dr. Harrow had recently prescribed reduced activity due to her elevated blood pressure, a common complication with multiple pregnancies. The nursery at their Kensington townhouse had been completed under Beatrice's expert guidance, Walls painted a soothing sage green with hand-drawn woodland creatures Ilara had sketched, and Julian had insisted on having professionally transferred to the walls. Twin oak cribs stood positioned near windows overlooking their private garden, each with identical mobiles crafted from wooden stars that caught the morning light. "You've incorporated elements from both our families beautifully," Julian observed, as they reviewed the completed room. "The Ashbourne oak furniture with your artistic vision." Ilara rested a hand on her prominent abdomen as one of the twins executed what felt like gymnastics. "They're running out of room," she noted with a tired smile. "Felix says they're developing perfectly, but I suspect they'll arrive before the 38th week target." "Impatient like their father," Julian replied, placing his hand beside hers to feel the strong movements. The peaceful moment ended abruptly when Ilara gasped, clutching the doorframe as a sharp pain radiated across her lower back. "What is it?" Julian asked, instantly alert. "Just the Braxton Hicks contractions Felix mentioned," Ilara assured him, though her expression remained strained. "They've been increasing this week." Julian guided her to their bedroom, insisting she rest while he contacted Felix. The physician arrived within the hour, his examination thorough, and his expression increasingly concerned. "Your blood pressure has reached a concerning level," he informed them directly. "The protein levels in your urine indicate preeclampsia is progressing despite our preventative measures." "What does that mean for Ilara and the babies?" Julian asked, maintaining composure, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the bedpost. "It means hospital admission today," Felix replied firmly. "If we can't stabilize your condition within 24 hours, we'll need to deliver the twins immediately." Seeing their alarm, he added, "They've reached excellent development at 34 weeks. Their prognosis would be very good." Within 2 hours, Ilara was settled in a private suite at London's most prestigious maternity hospital. Julian arranged for his work to be handled remotely, refusing to leave her side except for brief, necessary absences. During one such absence the following morning, Ilara received an unexpected visitor. Lady Celeste Marwood appeared in the doorway, carrying a modest arrangement of spring flowers. "May I come in?" she asked with uncharacteristic hesitation. Ilara nodded, curious about this development. Since the silver locket gift, there had been no further communication from Julian's cousin. "I heard about your hospitalization through family channels," Celeste explained, placing the flowers on a side table. "I thought, well, I've experienced this particular complication myself." "You have children?" Ilara asked, genuinely surprised. A shadow crossed Celeste's face. "A daughter, briefly. She arrived too early during my marriage to Lord Marwood. The medical care then wasn't what it is now." She visibly composed herself. "But you're in excellent hands with Felix Harrow. He's the finest specialist in London." Before Ilara could respond to this unexpected vulnerability, Celeste continued with practical directness. "Preeclampsia can turn serious quickly. Don't allow Julian's optimism to delay necessary intervention. Men can be sentimental about these matters, but your safety must come first." The concern in her voice, genuine despite her formal delivery, touched Ilara deeply. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the advice and for coming." Celeste nodded once, her composure firmly back in place. "The Ashbourne men need strong women to balance their dramatic tendencies. It appears you're more than equal to the task." With a final glance at Ilara's monitor readings, she added, "I'll have my secretary send contact information for the best pediatric specialists, just as a precaution." After she departed, Ilara reflected on this revelation, a hidden trauma that explained much about Celeste's brittle exterior and obsession with family security. The insight transformed her from antagonist to complex human, whose circumstances had narrowed her choices and hardened her heart. When Julian returned and Ilara related the visit, his expression revealed surprise followed by understanding. "I never knew," he said quietly, "about her child. It explains so much." Throughout that day, Ilara's condition deteriorated despite medical intervention. Her blood pressure continued rising, and persistent headache signaled advancing preeclampsia. By evening, Felix gathered the medical team for consultation. "We need to perform a cesarean immediately," he informed Julian and Ilara. "The risks of waiting now outweigh any benefits of further fetal development." Julian maintained outward calm as the medical team prepared Ilara for surgery, but she saw the fear beneath his composed exterior. As they wheeled her toward the operating theater, she gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Always," he promised, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "Through this and everything to come." The procedure commenced with clinical efficiency, Julian seated beside Alara's head, while Felix worked with quiet competence behind the surgical drape. After what seemed simultaneously moments and eternity, a high, indignant wail pierced the clinical atmosphere. "Baby A is a boy," Felix announced. "Excellent size for 34 weeks, strong lungs." "Theodore," Alara whispered, her eyes meeting Julian's through a haze of medication and emotion. "Theodore Ellington Ashbourne." Seconds later, a second cry joined his brother's, equally robust, though slightly softer. "Baby B is also a boy," Felix confirmed. "Slightly smaller, but equally well developed." "Nathaniel," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Nathaniel Felix Ashbourne." Felix looked up momentarily, surprise giving way to evident pleasure at the name choice, before he returned his attention to completing the procedure. "Both infants are showing remarkably good development for 34 weeks. The pediatric specialist confirmed after thorough assessment, no respiratory issues, excellent reflexes, good color. They'll need standard monitoring, but I anticipate no significant complications." The relief on Julian's face was profound as he conveyed this news to Alara, whose consciousness had begun to drift from medication and exhaustion. "They're healthy," he assured her, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Both of them, perfect little miracles." Once Alara was stabilized in recovery, the nurses brought the swaddled twins for their first proper meeting. With careful assistance, Alara cradled Theodore, while Julian held Nathaniel, both parents momentarily overwhelmed by the reality of these lives they had created against medical probability. "They have your eyes," Julian observed, noting the distinctive shape even in Nathaniel's tiny features. "And your determination," Alara countered, watching Theodore's focused expression as he gripped her finger with surprising strength. Later that evening, when Beatrice arrived with Felix, the family circle expanded naturally to include them. The elderly woman approached the twins with reverent steps, her lined face transformed by joy as she touched each small head in turn. "My great-grandsons," she whispered. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you, Alara." As Julian observed this scene, 4 generations of family connected through love, rather than solely bloodlines, he reflected on the unlikely sequence that had brought them to this moment. A chance allergic reaction, a bookshop employee with basic medical knowledge, a connection that defied explanation. 3 weeks later, on a perfect May morning, they brought the twins home to their Kensington townhouse. Sunshine streamed through the nursery windows as Julian and Alara placed Theodore and Nathaniel in their waiting cribs for the first time. In the quiet nursery, watching their son sleep peacefully beneath mobiles turning in the gentle breeze, Julian drew Alara into his arms. "Did you ever imagine," he asked softly, "that day in the bookshop when I collapsed at your feet, that we would end up here?" Alara leaned into his embrace, her recovery progressing well, though the journey had left its mark on both of them. "No," she admitted, "but somehow, from that first moment when I held your hand, nothing else seemed possible either." As evening approached, they settled in the nursery's window seat, Theodore and Nathaniel sleeping contentedly after feeding. Alara had brought her sketchbook, her pencil moving with practiced ease as she captured the twins' peaceful expressions. "This will be the first in a series," she explained to Julian. "A family chronicle, perhaps eventually for display in the Ashbourne Gallery, alongside your mother's work." Julian's expression filled with quiet approval, the beginning of a new kind of Ashbourne legacy. Outside the window, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware of the small miracles sleeping peacefully within the townhouse walls. Inside, Alara and Julian exchanged a kiss that held all their journey. Chance transformed to choice, impossibility to miracle, strangers to family. Life had given them its greatest gift, not just children, though they were indeed miraculous, but the chance to create a love that transcended background, circumstance, and even medical certainty. Together, they had rewritten what was possible, proving that some connections are simply destined to be.